I'm seeing a lot of people talk about, yes, Biden and Harris are now elected and we cannot get complacent. But my concern is that the complacency has already begun. And we paid crucial hyper attention to the blatant racism that Trump was spewing. But I think it's also important that we pay attention to the subtleties with Biden, and saying things like, now we must heal. And, my focus is all Americans. After 70 million people voted for a blatant bigot. There is no distinction between, it's hard to talk when Mahalia Jackson is singing. There's just no distinction between, hey, we have a crisis in our country. There's no naming that. There's no naming. There is a major breakdown. What is happening is that Biden is playing into this idea that Trump was the issue and the only issue. And now that the hands of leadership have changed, now all will be fine, by saying things like, now is the time to heal, as a person who has been accused of sexual assault, is one, incredibly triggering, but also as a white cis man is ridiculous, because that then gets placed on marginalized folks, and particularly Black people, to then forgive the folks who will constantly oppress them regardless of who is president, and the racism that will persist regardless of who is president. I also think it's interesting that he is talking about healing now, but when he was asked about Walter Wallace Jr. just the other day and how we can actually address police brutality, he said, I think it's never acceptable to loot. That was his response. It wasn't, we need to heal. We need to address, the police department and their harm to Americans. It was, looting is never acceptable. So again, what you're seeing is this placating and this playing into an undeniable support of white people, period, regardless of how they voted, but this disregard of Black folks, regardless of how we voted, even though it is supposed to be our votes, our voice, right? So, makes me nervous that, racial and social justice educators and activists, organizers did a lot of work to, really dispel this myth that Trump was the biggest issue. And here we still have the person in the highest position of power who seems like he's already making insinuations that it's going to be really hard to, make that still come across to people that our institutions are systemically racist, even though he said that yesterday. Which I think is hilarious, because he wouldn't have that language without racial and social justice educators. And it does not excite me when people say things like transgender or systemic racism, unless they're actually doing shit for people who hold identities like that, and for folks who are impacted by it. Because it seems like it's sufficient enough to say systemic racism, but as long as people continue to endure it, it's like, shrug, but I said it, so that's what's more important. Black trans folks are dying at insurmountable rates, but Biden said it, so that makes, he said transgender the first time ever, but never mentioned it during the debates and never made it a concern of his, but he said it. He did his acceptance speech, and I guess we're supposed to jump for joy. I'm not. And I'm still going to check that. You all said that we can hold them accountable. I don't know if it started today or not, but I'm starting. So yeah, I just want folks to be aware of that, it's not just that folks are going to get complacent. It's the fact that the conditions are already being created for folks to be complacent.